Now we're on Daf Mem Ches Amid Beis. Ella Kashel Reish Lakish. Right? How is Reish Lakish going to justify that there's a violation of Me'ilah by paying up a person who is going to sell you massive amount of merchandise? He's called a siton, and yet there was no Mashiach, and Reish Lakish doesn't recognize a Kinyan Mos. So how is the transaction validated in order that he should be chayav from Me'ilah? We had already said in the previous daf that Reb Shimon certainly holds that Dvar Torah Mos Konos, and Reish Lakish was only going according to the Tanakama of Reb Shimon. So what we learned now in this brisa that Levi brought to our attention was a brisa that reflected the sheet of Reb Shimon, Dvar Torah Mos Konos, and therefore he's chayav mishum Me'ilah the moment that he, the retailer, pays the wholesale. Now the Mishnah says that if a seller makes a commitment to sell to a buyer, and then he decides that he wants to renege on the agreement, he'll get a mishapar. Why? Because we can't force the mocher to sell insofar as the fact that the kinyan was not clinched because the buyer did not receive the goods. So he never made a mashiach. But nevertheless, the commitment on the part of the mocher to sell, and now he reneges from that commitment, will generate a mishapara, kind of a curse. Itmar, and now we have machlok Abaye and Rav. Abaye Omar Odue Modinale. We really don't curse him out. We just notify him that he deserves a curse. But Rava Omar Milet Laitinale. We actually curse him. Abaye Omar Odue Modinale Defsit. He derives from the pasuk of Nasi B'Amchalo Sar. Now the word Nasi, which prohibits, this pasuk prohibits cursing another Jew, but although literally it says the prince in Israel, but the Gemara Darshan said it refers to any Jew. So anytime you curse a Jew, you violate this law. And therefore, we don't want to play with fire over here, says Abaye. Right? All we want to do is want to inform him, Odinale, that if he reneges on the agreement, then there'll be some retribution that'll be executed, that'll be exacted from him. But we're not going to curse him. Rava Amar Melit Layadodik Biamcha. So what does Rava derive from the word Nasi Biamcha? Osa Maisa Amcha. You're not allowed to curse someone who's behaving properly, as a Jew should, according to the Abrahamic tradition. But if this case he's reneging from an agreement that he committed himself to sell, then sorry, buddy, you don't fit under Osa Maisa Amcha, and therefore we have a green light to curse you. Omar Rav Mina Minale, do I have a source from something that went on in either the earlier Amoraic generations or perhaps even during the Tanoim period? There was some story, some ruling that would support Rava. Rabbi Chia bar Yosef Yavele Zuzi Amilcha. Rabbi Chia paid up. I'm sorry. Rabbi Chia here is the seller. Okay? Not to get confused. So the buyer paid up the seller for salt, milcha. El Besofi Kaya milcha. Now, before the salt was delivered to the buyer, the price of salt shot up. And therefore, Rabbi Chia wants to renege from the agreement. Well, why should he get stuck with a price? He could charge now an extra, 20% higher. Also, Lakame to Rabbi Yochanan. So this case came up in front of Rabbi Yochanan, and we would anticipate that Rabbi Yochanan is going to warn this Rabbi Chia that, listen, man, you're playing with fire over here. You made an agreement to sell the salt, and now you want to renege on the agreement? Malay, Rabbi Yochanan says to Rabbi Chia, Zil Havle, deliver the salt. the elo, and if you're not willing to do so, kabel alecha mishapara. Accept upon yourself this whammy, this curse of the mishapara. So how does Rava see in this story of Rabbi Yochanan's response to Reb Chia that the mishapara is not something that we notify him that there's going to be retribution coming down from heaven, but rather we actually curse him? What are you going to tell me? That the mishapara here is just to notify him? Reb Chia bar Yosef bar Oduyayu? I mean, you have to inform him of the... He knows the Torah. He knows what it means that God, metes out retribution to those who are not honest. Ve'elamai. So now the Gemara says, Rava, you want to prove from this case that we actually hit him with a whammy, with a curse. Meilit light like Tidale? Who are you dealing with here? You're dealing with Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Chia bar Yosef. Rabbi Chia Yosef like Kabuli Alei Letusa Drabanan? You're going to make it such that that this Rabbi Chia, one of the greats in Israel, he would receive a curse from Israel, from the rabbis? Ella, but rather you have to assume Rabbi Chia bar Yosef, a Ravan who diyovelei. Rabbi Chia demanded, when he agreed to sell the salt, some sort of eravon, a guarantee. I think you can call it a down payment. Now, apparently, this eravon, down payment, was only a fraction of the value of the salt. Who's Savar? Reb Chia thought, Kinegdo Kona. Okay, I made a commitment. He paid me the money, but he paid me for a fraction of the salt. That fraction of the salt, I'll definitely live up to my word and I'll sell it to him. But that collateral that I gave him does not guarantee him the entire volume of the salt, because he only gave me a collateral that's worth a fraction of the salt. So basically, what the Gemara is saying is that Reb Chia bar Oven was only reneging on the monies that he didn't receive, not on the monies that he received. The Amalei Rabbi Yochanan keneged kulahu kona. Rabbi Yochanan argued against and rejected the premise that underlie the actions and the motivations of Rabbi Chia, and said to Rabbi Chia, you know what? If you receive payment, a down payment on X amount of salt, meaning keneged the value of the salt, no. You received the down payment for the entire volume of the salt, even beyond the value that corresponds to the eravon. And in fact, this issue now is explicitly debated by Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Itmari Rav on Rav Omer Kenegdo Kona. Rav says that you paid a down payment of X, which is a fraction of Y, and your Kona through the Eravon X and not beyond X. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lo. Rabbi Yochanan says Keneged Kulo Kona. Then Eravon operates to give a kinyan for the entire sum of money. Mesve, we had a kasha. And now we're going to slug up Rav, who says, Kenegdo Kon. No sene Ravan lechavera. Vi Omar Lo. Okay, now who's talking and who's receiving this Ravan? It's the buyer who committed himself to purchase, let's say at 1,000, and he gives with that commitment to buy 1,000, he gives an Iravon that's worth 600. The Amar Lo. And the buyer says to the seller, if I will renege from this agreement and I decide I don't want to buy your schara, then ervoni machalacha, you own the 600. V'alo Amar Lo. And now the seller says to the buyer, if I'll renege and refuse to sell it to you, I'll pay you twice that amount. I'll pay you 600 times 2. Not a bad deal. Niskaima atnoim divrei Reb Yossi. Now, what's going on over here? The lover who made that commitment, he didn't expect to renege on the deal. He expected to buy the merchandise. And the seller, from his part, expected to sell the merchandise. Nobody expected that this Eramon would come through. And that's called in the world of monetary Jewish law, asmachta. It's like the issue of gambling. Gemara in Sanhedrin that we're familiar with, that the gambler, when he enters into a card game or whatever he's playing, he expects to win. He doesn't expect to lose. And there's a gzela if somebody takes his money because asmachta lo kanya. But here Rav Yossi holds that asmachta kanya. Rav Yossi the time of the Omer asmachta kanya. This is a famous Rav Yossi. I think it's at the end of Bava Basra. Let's see if we can figure that out. Yeah, at the end of Bava Basra, asmachta kanya. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Now, all he was machna him is the value of the Rama. Right? That's security they gave him. That's the value that was subject to this kinyan, to this transaction. So if he gave him a Ravan of 600, then there was a kinyan on 600. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is now qualifying the position and the ruling of Rabbi Yehuda. When do we say that it's Keneged Ervono? That's where the kinyan is. It's Bisman Sha'omalo Ervuni Yikam. Okay, that's a case of an Iravon. But now the question is, what about a down payment in a purchase? However, says Rav Shimon Gamliel, in a case of a down payment, and you're buying karka, let's say I want to buy a building and it's worth $1 million, so I give you $500,000 down. I'm counting the entire building. It's not like the case of metaltal, where we said kenegdo, keneged ervono. So I owe you an outstanding debt of $500,000 because I only paid you $1 million down. And whenever I pay that loan because the kinyan was already complete when I gave you the down payment. My love. So Gemara says logically we should make the following analogy: Who had din limitalto? The same rules should apply to metalton. It's not limited to karka. And b'nistama kani lulakula. That if what's the case? The buyer or the seller? Just 1 second. Right. The buyer, if you recall, gave a security to the seller in order to clinch the kinyan of purchasing what he committed himself to purchase. Now, again, we're talking without Mashiach, so we're talking about Mos. So therefore, the worst case scenario, we're talking about a Mishapara. Not so in the case of Karka. Let's keep this in mind. In Karka, Mos, Konos, Lekuli Alma. Reish Lakish has no debate about Karka. Like Karka nicknames Bekesen. And therefore, when we talk about a partial down payment, and we're saying that he's kona the entire karka, that's mamash and kinyan. In the case of metaltalin, what we're talking about is a mishapara, because again, there was no meshicha on the metaltalin, and the payment is only like a verbal commitment. So in the worst case, if you're saying that it's kana kulo, you're talking about for a mishapara. And the down payment is like a commitment for the entire sale, everything that's included therein. But in any event, all this is against Rav, because Rav holds that when you give a person a mishapara, that mishapara is only on the money that corresponds to the value, the market value of the actual payment, which was a partial payment. So where it says low, this brisa does not have any application to metaltalin. You're jumping the gun with your analogy from karka to metaltalin. Metaltalin b'distama lo kani. If the buyer doesn't specify, explicitly pronounce that this security is for the entire sale, then as far as the laws of mishapara, he would only be considered reneging on that amount of money that he gave as a deposit, as a first payment, as a down payment. Umayshna, Gemara asks, why is it that in the case of karka, the down payment is coded on the entire karka? Even though he didn't necessarily say explicitly that this is a payment for the entire karka, but in the case of metaltalin, as far as mishapara is concerned, we're not going to extrapolate from his partial payment that he's paying for the whole thing. As far as mishapara is concerned, right? Is karka de bekaspa kani le mamish kani le lekula metaltalin del kani le lekabuli mishapara. So when you're dealing with karka and you're dealing with kesef is a complete kinyan, and Allah is a down payment is kona the entire karka. But when you're dealing with mishapara, he only deserves a mishapara when he reneges on that amount of money that he gave as a down payment. Tanoi, shall we say that the machlokes between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan is really a machlokes Tanoim? And now we get into the laws of Shmitas Ksofim. So the Torah says that when the 7th year comes around, Shmot, which means you're not allowed to press the lova to pay up, unless the lova had given you a collateral, a mashkon, and that mashkon is not subject to the law of Shemitah, which means that as a result of the mashkon, the malva, even after Shemitah, can collect his chol. There's no Shemitah and Shmot on this loan because there was a mashkon on this loan. Because the mashkon is like a payment to the chol. which means that the Malva doesn't have to violate lo yigos by demanding the money because he already has the collateral. However, what happens if the collateral is worth less than the loan? So let's say the loan was 1,000 and the collateral was only worth 600. And the Gemara is going to prove that that's machlokas between Rav Shimon Gamliel and the Chachamim and the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. And the Gemara says that machlokas is identical to the machlokas between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan about whether or not a down payment is keneged kulo, he's kona keneged kulo, or only keneged that money. But the Gemara goes through some loops in the air in order to prove that that's really what's going on over here. Hamalves chaver lamashko v'nichnusa shmita. So what happens if the mashko was only worth part? It was partial value of the chov. Afal pishen shavel a plug. It's only worth a fraction, half of the loan. Eino mishame. He has, when I say he, I mean the Malva, has successfully circumvented the law of Shmot. He can continue and collect that chov even after Shemitah. Divrei Reb Shimon Gamliel Pashtus, when you read Reb Shimon Gamliel, he's saying that the mashkon is kona keneged kulo, the entire loan. But the Gemara is not so sure about it. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi Omer Imoya Mashkin Keneged Alva also Einu Mishamid V'Lav Mishamid. Which again, if I'm going to interpret this kipashtus, means that the part of the chov that's protected from Shemitah is only the value of the chov keneged the mashkin. But above beyond that, the other 400, that's canceled by Shemitah. That's called Misham. What did Reb Shimon Gamliel mean when he said Eino Mishame to Gomer Shimon? What does Eino Mishame mean? Ilema kenegdo, that the part of the loan that corresponds to the value, the part of the mashkin, the value which corresponds to that fraction of the loan is protected from shmot, and it's not canceled. Then what are you going to do, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi? Michal Rabbi Yehuda Nasi sovar lahach palga nami mishame. It would have to mean if Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is only protecting the loan from Shemitah up to the value of the mashka, which is 500, then it would mean that according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the entire loan is subject to Shemitah and is canceled. How could that be? I mean, he accepted a security for half the price of the loan. And here we turn to Daf Memtes. Ella, we have to say that Mashkon did not get, Mashkon not get Lomali. So according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the way we're interpreting it, then what did the Malva gain by taking Mashkon? I mean, he wanted to protect himself from Shemitah. We have no choice but to assume that what do the words mean in Reb Shimon Gamliel? Eina Mishami to Gomer Reb Shimon Gamliel, Eina Mishami Kulo. The loan is not canceled at all. Again, that's a sheet that has to be understood, but he's basically saying that Kanakulo, that the mashkon is like a kinyan on the entire loan, even though it's only worth a fraction of the loan. See, that's the intuitive, logical position here of Yehuda Nasi. So for half of the loan, which was equivalent, correspond to the value of the security of the mashkon, that is protected from Shemitah. But above and beyond that half, that was not protecting the loan, and that was subject to egos, and therefore the law of Shemitah kicks in. What is the nature of the machlok between Rav Shimon Gamliel and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi? Rav Shimon Gamliel suffer v'keneged kulahu kona. He holds that you're kona keneged kula, which was Rabbi Yochanan, And Rabbi Yehuda Nosi Savar Kenegdo Hu Kone. You're only Kone the value of the mashkon, but not beyond. Gemara says, "Lo, you know what? This is not the only way that we could justify the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda Nosi and Shimon Gamliel. Maybe we go back to original position that what does Rabbi Shimon Gamliel mean when he says Heina Mishame to cover Shimon Gamliel is lahach palga de noket ale to look at malga. So only part of the loan, which is equivalent to the value of the mashkon, that part is not subject to shmita. It's not canceled. So frek Gemara, but Michlal Rabbi Yehuda Nasi Sover Lach Palga de Noket Ole Mashke Nami Mishamet. Could it be that the entire loan is canceled, and yet the Malvin took a mashkon on part of the loan, let's say 50% of the loan, is el mashkon nokule lomale? Why did he take such a mashkon if not to protect himself from the cancellation power of Shemitah? And more answers lezichron dvarim v'alma. This was only a way of reminding the lover that he has this outstanding loan. Let me just see if he adds anything here. So according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, a security that's worth less than the value of the loan serves merely as a record of the loan, which prevents the borrower from denying the obligation. A lender who wants a potential payment for the loan would take a security worth the full value of the loan. Hence, a security worth less than the loan does not count as a potential payment or partial payment of the loan. The lender still needs to press the borrower for repayment of the loan, and therefore Shemitah is going to cancel the loan. Okay, then, so this is where we'll stop here on the top of Memtes, and in Mirz Hashem, Daf Memtes we'll do tomorrow. Thank you so much.